The following interview was recorded for PrivateEquity.com radio and the Certified Private Equity Professional CPEP Certificate Program. For more great interviews and other private equity resources, visit PrivateEquity.com.
Today we have with us Susan Hagerty, Chairman of International Alliance Associates, a private equity placement agent and cross-border strategic advisory firm. Thank you for joining us and welcome, Susan.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much. We
appreciate having you on. Can you please briefly describe your position now? What do you do in private equity?
So, as you mentioned, our firm is really a cross-border private equity advisory and placement firm, and we focus primarily on emerging markets that are very robust and quite challenging and opaque, but that have very unique opportunities for private equity placement and positioning of portfolio companies, their value propositions, that is, on a cross-border basis into these emerging markets, such as the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, known as the GCC, and that includes Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, and Oman.
Okay. That's a really specific offering.
Well, and also Latin America and Mexico.
Sure.
We've been in these regions since the mid-'80s when I was an executive at Lehman Brothers, raising money for LBO funds and so forth.
Okay, well, that kind of leads into my next question, which was what was your professional experience prior to your placement in advisory work at International Alliance? It sounds like Lehman Brothers, but did you work in any other areas of related to private equity or anything that led you specifically to the Middle East and these target markets?
Well, my experience with the Middle East dates back to actually having lived there when I was very young, and then studying Arabic formally at the university, and the same is true of my experience throughout Latin America and Mexico, learning to speak Spanish and Portuguese.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense then, that you would be able to use that in the professional capacity. That's great. Okay, well, that gives us an idea about some of your background. We can talk a little bit more about what you guys do at International Alliance. So how do you decide what managers or investment opportunities to raise capital for and take on as clients?
So we vet our clients very carefully, and we try to assure that there's an alignment of interest in terms of the verticals that they're involved with and the investment criteria that the bulk of our investors throughout these regions have, and that would include sovereign wealth funds, quasi-sovereigns, pension funds, royal family offices, investment banks, private equity firms, foundations, insurance companies, and so forth. Okay.
And have you seen a pretty large growth in sovereign wealth funds? I know that's kind of what we've seen on our end, and also family offices, but it sounds like you're focused more on the royal and country-specific ones. So how have you seen that sovereign wealth industry develop?
So the private equity industry throughout these emerging markets has expanded dramatically over the past 8 years or so. A lot of private equity firms have cropped up all over the Gulf countries, and there are also a lot of private equity entities within some of the larger banking and financial institutions now. So it's an asset category that has evolved dramatically. I would just say that the trend has been to allocate less to private equity funds and more to co-invests and direct transactions.
Okay, that's consistent with what we've seen in terms of the direct investing preference for a lot of sovereign wealth funds, and these larger institutional investors have like to sort of circumvent the fees and be able to invest on their own. We had a sovereign wealth expert who's a professor out at NYU spoke at our most recent event.
Yes, I was there. I
okay,
know
yes.
this individual.
Yeah. So his perspective was talking a lot about how they were direct investing, as you remember. So I think that's consistent with everything we've heard and what we've seen. So that's interesting. Okay. And I was wondering, for those private equity fund managers that maybe think they're a good fit for your platform and they're looking to raise capital in these markets or just in general, do you have a few tips for private equity fund managers looking to raise capital?
Well, I think in these challenging markets that it's really very important to understand the culture, understand the language, understand the subtleties, have the organizational and market intelligence, and have the long-term relationships, which really drive all the decision-making. And that's really what we do, is provide sort of a halo effect or an implicit endorsement to our private equity clients that we work with, and bring and introduce them to all the key decision makers, a lot of whom will be C-level officials and ultra-high net worth investors and so forth.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's really what we've sort of harped on in a lot of these interviews and a lot of our conversations with fund managers. It's the long-term aspect, the patience and the ability to keep these relationships long-term, because investors want to get to know you over time. So I think that's definitely a good point.
Yes, and that's really, again, these long-term relationships we have developed with over 1,000 of the key investment entities, and they've been developed since the mid-'80s, actually. So it's extremely valuable access that we provide and advisory support that we provide private equity firms and their portfolio companies.
Mm-hmm. And toward that end, are you primarily, out of those 1,000 or so, are you bringing managers into the Middle East in these different markets, or are they usually more active, and so that's how you sort of form that connection, or are you introducing them and familiarizing them with the space, or they already have roots in the Middle East and those different markets?
Well, what we typically do, we found that most private equity firms tend to gravitate toward a comfort zone that they have, which entails quite often working with sovereign wealth funds and the expatriates that work at those sovereign wealth funds. And our relationships are at a much higher level. They're with the local nationals that actually manage all of the expatriates. So the level of access that we provide is at a much more significant level. That's really the strategic reach that we provide to private equity managers.
Yeah, that seems exceptionally valuable, I'm sure, for a lot of these private equity funds that haven't really cracked the market. They have some relationships, but definitely would like to have, all of the, take advantage of all the work you've done in the region. So that's great.
Well, I think that a lot of people don't understand that, excuse me 1 second, that some of the merchant families or family office holding companies can be even larger than sovereign wealth funds. They often own over 100 companies globally. And there are a lot of other areas besides sovereigns that are very important when you're pursuing that market.
Okay. That's definitely good to keep in mind, that it's not all just the headline making sovereign wealth funds. There are a lot of other very powerful and very large investors out there. Okay, well, that's a great point. And sort of towards the other end, are there common mistakes that either investor relations professionals or third-party marketers make when approaching investors, either specifically in these regions or just in general?
Well, I think it really, to a large extent, comes down to not having an appreciation of or a full understanding of the culture and all of the local market and organizational intelligence required to approach them. I can't tell you how many people in this field end up wasting an enormous amount of time and resources and make very costly mistakes that can be avoided. And that's where our advisory services come in handy, because it really minimizes and accelerates the time to closing.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense when you think of how people sometimes think of third-party marketers or placement agents. They think it's making a few phone calls on their behalf or reaching out to that network, but really it's that groundwork you've already laid, and it's the relationships you have, and it's the understanding of the culture, and it's being able to bring them into meetings and all those different aspects that sometimes get overlooked in favor of just calling on a bunch of investors. And it's not so much that, especially in these regions that are a little harder to enter.
Exactly. And the other thing is I happen to know a lot of people that call themselves placement agents, and they might set up one appointment a day, and oftentimes the investors are not even vetted properly. And our protocols include having at least 3 meetings with super qualified investors every day, sometimes as many as 4 or 5. Okay.
And so it's taking that extra effort to make sure that it's not just a meeting, it's a meeting that something can actually get done and that there's an interested party on the other end.
Of course.
Okay. And I guess speaking towards that fundraising process, what do you think of the current fundraising environment for private equity funds?
Well, I think that it's quite favorable, but again, it's if you have all of the underpinnings that are required and the relationships and the market and organizational knowledge. It's really having this turnkey sense of things and understanding the investment criteria.
Okay. Yeah, I think I definitely agree. I mean, it's specific to the private equity fund and what they have to offer and how long they've been doing it and what their track record is and everything. But I think for the right funds, there's a lot of interest from investors.
Absolutely.
I know. Excuse me. I know that you have a deep experience in the Middle East and Latin America. What are the most exciting countries or sectors right now?
Well, I would say in the Gulf, probably the more exciting countries would be the Kingdom, which is that's Saudi Arabia, which is larger than all the rest of the 5 countries combined. Abu Dhabi as well as Qatar are also very robust markets. And Latin America, I would say Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil are probably the markets that are the most robust in this space.
That's interesting you say Colombia. I was in Colombia a couple of years ago, and at that private equity event we were referencing earlier, I spoke to someone who runs a nonprofit in Colombia, and he was just talking about the appetite in that country, and it was a little surprising to me because I had been there for vacation and I hadn't really thought of it as a private equity market, but it seems like there's a lot of exciting things happening in that country, so that's interesting. Okay, and industry specific, what private equity trends do you see in the Middle East and Latin America?
I I would say there's a lot of interest in food and beverage. There's a lot of interest in upstream oil and gas technology, enhanced oil recovery, renewables, green building products, education, and healthcare. That would be primarily medical devices and diagnostics, and franchises, and hospitality. Those are all areas of great interest.
Okay, yeah, I've seen some of those sectors, but some of those I hadn't really heard too much attention to. So that's interesting to keep in mind. Okay, and I know that the Middle East and some emerging markets in Latin America can be intimidating to a North American or European-based fund because there's a lot of potential problems that could arise investing in less developed areas. Obviously, you have the background of being of growing up for a time in the Middle East and the Arabic and having some experience in Latin America. So how do you allay these concerns and mitigate against potential risks for your clients? How do you get them comfortable with that idea? We've touched on it a little bit before, but if you could just flesh that out a little bit.
So some of the concerns that I've seen have been in terms of vetting investors properly, making sure that they're legitimate and honorable investors and sticky long-term investors. Those are some of the issues that seem to consistently pop up. Okay.
Yeah, I think those are all good things to keep in mind, really in any market, but specifically in these regions, that's especially important. Okay, and do you have any advice for smaller or emerging fund managers looking to raise capital?
So most of our investors will not invest in first-time funds. So, we simply don't work with first-time managers by and large unless there's a really compelling value proposition, such as first-time fund managers that are focusing on oil and gas and enhanced oil recovery or water technologies. The water sector is of great interest to our investors. And
Oh, really?
Yes.
And would you say if they came from perhaps a larger private equity firm and had the track record of managing a fund in that regard and then went out on their own, does that change things, or you still like to see it in Fund 2, Fund 3, how they've managed those operations on their own?
So again, unfortunately, our investors will not invest generally in first-time funds unless they're in the verticals we just discussed.
Sure.
So it's a pity because I recognize that there are a lot of very, very competent, successful managers that have been with other premier private equity firms, and then they start out on their own and they try and replicate the model. And it's I don't know that there's any fast-track solution or advice that I can provide.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's similar to what we've had to tell a lot of managers because we focus primarily on family offices and that's sort of our area, and a lot of family offices are a little nervous about the smaller funds or below a certain AUM threshold, or the same thing with not having a track record and not having a fund under their belt already. So I don't think that's anything too new for them to hear, but it's just I think in those first funds you have to reach out to family, friends, and find other capital sources before you try to hit on these more institutional investors. I think that's definitely true.
That's right.
Okay. Was there any other topic or area that you want to discuss today?
Well, only the whole area of co-invest and direct transactions, where we have a tremendous amount of investor interest in the verticals that we just described.
Sure.
So water, enhanced oil recovery, upstream oil and gas, even downstream oil and gas technology, healthcare, education, hospitality, and even real estate.
Okay. Yeah, I think of those all sectors seem to have the same theme of being areas that are developing in the Middle East, in a lot of these countries. And so I wonder if it's sort of a two birds, one stone approach of investing in private equity funds that they see are going to either improve the country or improve the lives of the citizens, or if it's anything related to that where there's just good opportunities. Do you think there's a social
absolutely.
aspect?
No. It's, I don't think that a lot of people keep in mind the fact that we're dealing with monarchies, and the underpinnings of the diversification of these economies tend to be linked to sort of social policy initiatives, such as job creation, capacity building, economic diversification, and so forth.
Okay. I think that's an important point to keep in mind that often gets overlooked. So if you want to talk any more on any particular thing, I'm happy to. But otherwise, I just want to thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure.
Today we had with us Susan Hagerty, chairman of International Alliance Associates, a private equity placement and cross-border strategic advisory firm. Thank you so much for being with us, Susan. I really enjoyed our talk today.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed it too. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to PrivateEquity.com radio. If you would like more interviews, visit PrivateEquity.com. At PrivateEquity.com, we offer private equity data, webinars, training programs, networking events, and other valuable resources for private equity professionals.